And here to talk about it with us today, Tom Horn and Joe Ardis. Guys, welcome to Prophecy Watchers.
Great to be with you again, Gary, as always.
Here, Gary, yep.
Tom, sitting down and talking with you is always a pleasure, and we're going to talk about something that I think most people have never heard about. It's featured in your new documentary. It's called Inhuman. This is, I believe this documentary should be in the hands of every Christian today. Now, I don't say that about every DVD set that I pick up. This one, on the other hand, I think has tremendous weight. Let's talk about it. How did you begin to put together this documentary called Inhuman?
Yeah, thanks for asking me that. And by the way, since you've seen the film, you might understand how, now looking backward, if I had understood the scope of this project when I started out, I'd have said, never mind, it's just way too big for me. Took us 5 years. But, you know, one of the lead questions on every program we're doing right now that people are asking is, how did you get started with this? What caused you to do it? Why did you do it? Why do you think it's important for the church? And it really is interesting because you're here in Oklahoma City. And about 10 years ago, I was actually writing a feature article for one of the largest newspapers here in Oklahoma on the subject of Halloween, by the way. The internet was still pretty young then. I'm in the internet. I'm trying to find some history. But I came across a term, I'd never seen it before, called transgenics. And I thought, what in the world? And it took me a moment to kind of wrap my mind around it. And then I started getting, okay, transgenetics, transgenes, which somehow here we're talking about crossing over species barriers. We're talking about combining different kinds of life forms or whatever in ways that neither God or, if you're an evolution believer, evolution didn't allow for. So I got real interested in it. Make a long story short, I went from being interested to also being concerned, and because I'm a prophecy believer and I'm a biblical literalist, I started seeing a lot of stuff in this whole idea, what we're going to cross over species barriers? Didn't God order each kind to reproduce only after its own kind? What does he know we don't know? So I wrote some material and it went online and went viral. Well, pretty soon, people I've never heard of before, they're the world's leading transhumanists, and now they're coming after me. We're talking about James Hughes, who wound up being in this documentary, one of the original founders of the modern transhumanist movement. Max Moore, who's considered to be the father of the modern transhumanist movement, and if people don't know what the term transhumanist or transhumanism is, it's just the title we give to people who believe that we're going to use technology now, including genetics, which you started off talking about, to modify what it means to be human. We're going to use these new powerful emerging fields of science, robotics, artificial intelligence, right? Ray Kurzweil, we're going to have nanobots in our brain, synthetic biology, genetics. We're going to use that to change ourselves. We're going to change our genetic makeup, make ourselves stronger, healthier, faster, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. We're going to interface our brain with artificial intelligence systems. So that's what they believe. And they were taking real issue with this fat preacher, Tom Horn, out there saying, hey, there might be some lines here that we don't want to race across, right? So and now I find out that at their big transhumanist conferences, they're being highly critical of Tom Horn. They're saying, we've got to figure out how to deal with guys like this, right?
Indeed. Genetic manipulation is what we're talking about. Genetic manipulation in animals, in plants, and in humans. Here's the thing that gets me, Tom. God created man in his own image and likeness. In other words, God created us the way he wanted us to be. Man comes along and says, you know, that's not good enough. I think we can improve on the original model. And for me, blasphemy is trying to improve on God's work. It just flies in the face of everything that I understand about the Bible. And yet, and I'm looking at Matthew 24, 37, and we've repeated this verse so many times. I've got it marked in yellow in my Bible here, and I read it all the time. And every time I read it, some new impact hits me because of the work that people like you are doing. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. How were the days of Noah?
Yeah, well, I think we agree, most scholars would, that probably if you had to pick one thing that, I mean, really kind of branded the days of Noah as different than any other day. It was a time when genetic manipulation was occurring. The stories are told outside the Bible, also repeated in the book of Genesis in the Bible, about these days of Noah when the watchers, powerful angels, descended down in the days of Jared, Noah's grandfather, and they started, manipulating human DNA. In fact, eventually all life, the book of Genesis says, man and beast. So there was this broad genetic corruption that led to the corruption of what God had made, and evidently it was so catastrophic that it led to God determining the only way to deal with this is you have to wipe out everything on earth except Noah,
right.
Which also in Genesis 6, right, he was found perfect in his generation.
He separated himself from the population at large, and he was not corrupted genetically, as were all the other beings on planet Earth. And we're headed that way again, as it was in the days of Noah.
That's exactly right. Now we are repeating, for the first time since the Great Flood, what we only have a record of ever having happened once before, and that is we're crossing over genetic barriers. Now, I've often thought that when you look into all of the records of history around the world, whether it was the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Greek, they all have these chimeras. They all have these ancient stories about these entities that came down, and then they blended animals and humans, and they made these monstrosities. And those stand as kind of a mute testimony.
And those monstrosities were gods. They had the heads of animals,
right,
and the bodies of men, and they were worshipped as gods by the Egyptians.
And the Apostle Paul writes about that in the New Testament, talking about how they worshiped the creation more than the Creator, and these entities took to themselves deity statehood or whatever, and it became demonic. So to answer your question, that's why we got started down this road and why we worked so long to produce a documentary to really ask the question from all different points of view. We have the world's leading transhumanists in this film talking about what they believe. On the other end, we have current members of the U.S. President's Council on Bioethics, men like Professor Hurlbut from Stanford University, talking about the conservative side of this. And then right in the middle, of course, what we did that nobody's ever done before was we took all these worldviews, and in the middle of it, we dumped who we think to be the world's leading prophecy scholars. And we said, now, gentlemen, is there something prophetic about what we're talking about? Not just is this an insult to God's creative genius. Not just could we create new disease strains because we're doing things that nothing in the world has allowed for, but could it also be a fulfillment of Matthew 24:37?
And the result in human is electrifying. And I believe me, I'm not given to exaggeration. This is truly electrifying. In human, the next and final phase of man is here. Sitting to Tom Horn's left is Joe Artis, producer, director. You've did a lot to bring all this together. You are an animal behavior specialist, and you deal with the animal world, animals as they relate to human beings. And you've recently completed a work on what's this book about? It's called Dead Pets Don't Lie, but it's way more than dead pets.
Well, to kind of get started on Dead Pets Don't Lie, I kind of have to back up to my involvement as one of the producers and being involved in the Inhuman documentary that you're talking about. I had the privilege for more than 5 years. 5 years was the production, but before that, the idea of the whole Inhuman movie really started with Tom and his Skywatch team. But I had the privilege of traveling with Tom for multiple years, as the director of lighting and photography. So I was the guy behind the camera in most of the interviews that people that watch the film might see, including yours, Gary.
I remember it well.
Yes.
I do.
Yeah, and of course, being in the presence of so many of what I consider the leading experts in the field of transhumanism, these sciences, nanotechnology, genetic manipulation of the genome that creates various species types, everything from plants to animals.
Now, you just said it, plants.
Yes.
Because we've been talking about animal experimentation, even human experimentation in genetics, but we haven't talked about foods yet. The food supply is being genetically manipulated.
It is. On the Skywatch program, recently we had a high-level trained holistic veterinarian named Dr. Jean Hovey. She's a dear friend of mine, very high-level trained, and she basically truncated the explanation that I'll share with you about how our animals, this is not just our pet animals, but it's the ones that we're eating. It's the ones that we're taking care, it's the ones that are placed on farms. It's the ones we're using for therapeutic work. It's all species, all animals. They're being fed things that are not native to what they should be eating.
Wow.
Things like cattle eating genetically modified corn, okay, when they should be feeding on grass. Well, what are the ramifications? We know that in science, for example, mice that are under the microscope, that are being presented with the option to eat genetically modified potatoes, for example, versus an organic potato, will always rush to the fully organic potato every single time. A mouse will do this. And sometimes, when they deny them the organic potato, the mice will gravitate finally out of starvation, pure survival instincts. They will finally eat the genetically modified potato. And sometimes the symptoms of the ramifications, the health side effects, are not visible in the first generation mouse. Sometimes they begin to kick in the second generation, and by the third generation of mice that have only been fed genetically modified foods, you're seeing the length of life cut in half. Plenty of them are sterile. The percentages of all kinds of kidney failures, blindness, are through the sky.
So why are we doing
So
this?
why do we care?
Yeah.
Because I think we can learn from animals. They have much shorter they have much shorter lifespans. And if we look at what science is doing, the inhumane experimentation, the things that they're doing right now with animals, we can learn a lot about what's happening to us as humans, as a species. For example, in the United States alone, every single day, 25,000 shipments of food are brought into the U.S. from other countries. The FDA, and by the way, Gary, a lot of people have this assumption that the FDA or some other benevolent branch of the government is able to regulate all of these foods coming in, that they're keeping a watchful eye. People don't have to do any thinking. They can pull anything they want off the grocery shelves, and it's safe because the FDA or an organization like that is watching out for them, and that's not the case. 1%, Gary, 1% of the 25,000 shipments we see come into the U.S. every single day, they only have the manpower and the ability to facilitate inspection, examination, scrutiny of about 1% of those foods. So we're putting our faith in countries like China to not chemically treat the meats, to represent them safely for what they are.
And that's about all you need to say about that.
That's right. That's right.
Now,
but Jean Hovey's been able to demonstrate how what we're eating is changing our physiology.
Wow.
Species of animals that are third generation.
And that includes human beings.
That includes human beings. So it's very easy to be overwhelmed by this discussion.
And she sits on boards with the FDA and whatever. She is a highly
AFCO.
qualified individual.
That's right.
And when she tells you that the foods that are being consumed are changing, rewriting the DNA, and that it's becoming heritable, second generation, third generation are getting the negative health results of consuming those products, then yeah, what is the animal kingdom already teaching us about what we could be doing to ourselves? Why do we have an explosion right now of a return of diseases that were almost eradicated? Attention deficit disorders, Down syndrome, all these kinds of things.
So now we've got two aspects of genetic modification, the food supply and the beings themselves. Animals, of course, have been subjects of genetic modification experiments for years. Humans have too, only it's been kept very, very quiet. And Tom, I want to get back to your work and the work that is really spoken of loudly and clearly in the documentary Inhuman, and that is the attempt by certain parties to create a superior human being through genetic modification. And let me say this before I turn it back over to Tom. When we think of genetic modification, we think of huge laboratories, we think of multi-million-dollar equipment, we think of huge procedures that take years. We're going to show you something in a minute that will blow your mind, because Tom has actually brought a, if you will, a show and tell that is mind-boggling. In fact, it's frightening to me, Tom.
Yeah.
The implications.
Well, so here's the thing. And there's several reasons why I brought this with me today. This is actually Gary, if you want to hold that,
I'll hold this.
I'll get rid of this big container.
This is a refrigerated container.
This is a refrigerated container, and what's inside the container is a CRISPR Cas9, and this kit in particular is designed for use in actually doing modifications to human DNA. That's specifically what this kit is actually created for. Now,
in this box.
it's inside this box. Well, inside the box, if Tom Horn owned a laboratory, I would pull out the user's manual, and then you can see all the little vials inside here,
Absolutely.
which then could be used to, using a syringe, introduce these vials in their proper order, intravenously. This is coded to actually go to a particular place in the DNA strand to do a particular thing with the genes where it's instructed to go. To put this in real layman's terms, what a CRISPR kit is, it's cut and paste for any kind of a species that procreates using sperm and eggs. So all mammals, humans, all the animals that you know of, you can use this kit to cut the strands in its DNA, do gene therapy, do genetic, cutting out perhaps a defective gene.
Eliminating a defective
And then
gene.
it glues that strand back together so that it's uninterrupted, and you have performed a modification to the genetic makeup of that species. And this is, of course, this one here is made actually to be used, a gene knockout kit. This is made to be used on a human. Now,
Let me just say that we'll put this word on the screen for you, CRISPR. It's an acronym, and let me just read what CRISPR stands for. Clustered, regularly interspersed short palindromic repeats. Palindrome. A palindrome is something that reads the same in both directions. Like Madam, I'm Adam reads Madam, I'm Adam backwards.
right.
And so these palindromic injectables will intersperse themselves right into a genetic sequence
Right.
and change the sequence. That is diabolical.
Well,
because, I mean, you can say, well, you can cure diseases,
Yes.
but you can also change the nature of the being.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, so the way that CRISPR-Cas9 is being sold is for its therapeutic promises. I mean, human trials are going to start very quickly using this kind of technology in hopes of finding a cure to cancer. Well, who wouldn't want that, right? Gene therapy to lead to a kind of cure for cancer, other kinds of diseases. You want to put this back
Sure.
down?
Well, we'll just put that right
All
there.
right.
Sure.
I feel more comfortable with it closed.
Yeah, let's leave
And
the,
so
the lid on that.
You remember the old television or the old movie Gattaca?
I do.
And the idea that all humans born in the future have to go through this process. They can only be genetically engineered. There's nothing left of like man meets woman and they fall in love and they have children and we leave it all to nature. In the future, everybody's genetically engineered. Well,
Yeah.
this is actually now in real life no longer sci-fi. This is the kind of technology
You think that
that
we-
you could use to begin altering the genetic makeup of all humans down line.
We were headed for a minimum requirement for human beings. In other words, you have to be genetically at such and such a level before you'll be accepted maybe as a real human being.
Well, it certainly could lead to that. So again, in Washington, D.C., actually this week in Washington, D.C., and in last week, scientists from all over the world came together because of this little box that's sitting in your studio right now and what it represents.
Wow.
Scientists from the lead laboratories out of China. And you know, in China right now, China was the first country to publicly admit that they used this technology right here, CRISPR-Cas9 technology, to do germline genetic modification on human embryos. And that threw up some giant red flags. People are saying, wait a minute, maybe these are lines we shouldn't cross. Why? Because when you make modifications to a species at the germline level, this is at the very earliest embryonic level or at the sperm or egg level, those become permanent, heritable, makeup, part of the genome of that species. So everything born down line is going to carry those same character traits, good or bad. And so this has, for the longest time with bioethicists, been the line they've said we have to be very careful or maybe never cross over this line. So scientists from China, from the Academy of Medical Sciences out of Britain, from the top medical institutes and scientists out of America, they all got together in Washington, D.C., and if you go and Google this right now, you'll see where they're saying we have got to take extraordinary measures now to try to somehow create a universal moratorium on the use of this technology for making germline modifications to humans. Why? Because this technology could literally reshape all humanity from this point and forward, good or bad. You could create superhumans. You might create modern forms of Nephilim. You could create something that gives birth to a prion contamination, a disease strain for which we have no history. There's nothing about it that we would understand, and it could be devastating. If we get a chance on this show or the next one, maybe we should also talk about how terrorists have plans to use this kind of technology, and ask yourself this question: if a terrorist could use this to create a devastating plague, and if Tom Horn can get his hands on this, you can believe they can get their hands on it.
Indeed. Friends, do you realize the extent of what Tom is talking about? Could literally change what is now called a human being into something else. Now, we only have a few minutes today to talk about this. The documentary Inhuman is 3 hours long, and Tom, you've interviewed people who are basically in favor of human genetic research, as well as people like me who approach the genetic research from a biblical perspective, and I think of it as absolute blasphemy against God to change the basic nature of humanity. But let's talk for a minute about some people who might be in favor of genetic engineering.
Right. Well, some of the people that we interviewed, and these are all top, well-known, famous names in the transhumanist communities. Dr. James Hughes, who originally started out kind of lobbing grenades at Tom Horn. They wrote stuff on, his is the most well-known website out there for transhumanists, IEET, the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, and all the world's top transhumanists blog and write over there. And they published an article over there at one point comparing me to the Unabomber and saying that guys like me are really dangerous and whatever. Well, I wanted to reach across the table and say, sit down with me. You tell me what you believe. This is not going to be a gotcha film. We're not going to set you up.
Yeah.
We're going to let you say what you believe. Well, people that get the film from you, Inhuman, and watch it will see him talking about how he is in favor of modifying, not just modifying humans, combining our genetic makeup with animals in order to produce a superior form. To go back to the companion book, Dead Pets Don't Lie, he also wants to uplift chimpanzees to give them basic cognition so that monkeys can attend school with kids. I mean, but these are very smart people. Wow. He's a professor. He teaches at the university level. So, and that is definitely a part of his worldview.
And of course, we've always heard about the super soldier, DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, the government with the black budgets, and, and they're creating like a genetically modified soldier, perhaps. We don't know what they're doing, but we know they're into genetic modification.
Yes. Well, in fact, this year's presidentially approved DARPA budget has tens of millions of dollars in it specifically to use this kind of technology to create a new blueprint for our soldiers, future soldiers on the battlefield, to be genetically modified.
And Joe, coming from the other direction, the food industry is absolutely rife with this kind of experimentation, right?
It is. And again, people that think this is being regulated, it's just simply not the case. I want to add something to what Tom was saying, though, about the scientists that believe they can kind of organize what it is to be, okay, your feelings, your spirituality, the way you reason, the way you think. They believe that they can organize these things into selectable attributes that then they can lever up and down. For example, Gary, you have a genetic makeup. You're part of your lineage. You're part of your mother's lineage. You're part of your father's lineage. But what science can't track is what really, at the end of the day, what makes you tick? What makes you Gary Stearman? What makes you look at the world the way that you view the world through that lens? And so the proposal that we're going to somehow organize the genetics now of let's say the gray wolf and integrate that DNA into a human hybrid, but be able to organize the things we find desirable. We want him to be faster, but we don't want him to be aggressive. We want him to be stronger, but we don't want him to be fearful. And that we're going to lever all of these things and then create a predictable human. It's absolutely, in my opinion, the genetic liability is outrageous.
Using animal attributes in human beings. For example, animals can see ultraviolet light.
That's right.
And we can't.
That's
But
right.
Wouldn't it be nice if our eyes could detect ultraviolet light? Let's just bring in an animal gene into the human genome.
But this is something they're already working on, and maybe the next time I'm on your program, I can tell you about an experiment that was just conducted on a family member and what happened. I mean, it really goes into this idea of, could we open a doorway into supernaturalism through genetic manipulation?
Once I realized what Tom was talking about, I felt it in the pit of my stomach. You can feel the fear. When you realize that it may not be possible in the very near future to determine whether someone is 100% human. The implications of that are absolutely astonishing and biblical, by the way, because Latter-day prophecy speaks of a time when the days of Noah, that is, the days when the sons of God visited the daughters of men and produced hybrids, hybrid human angelic species that so displeased God that he had to destroy the entire world with a flood. And Jesus says very plainly it's going to be like that again in the last days. How would you destroy humanity genetically this time, Tom? How would you do that?
Well, of course, you could do it the same way as what happened back then, the idea that something could become so modified as to no longer even be considered to be human any longer. And of course, in this documentary film, we have people that are advocating for that. That's why they call themselves transhumans. And they're working towards a post-human condition. They believe that they can absolutely modify, perfect, and change what it means to be a human. But the question then comes up, also some of the experts in there talking about a term called ensoulment. This is a Christian idea that God breathed into man, and man became a living soul, a receptacle for the Holy Spirit to live in, to have communion with the Creator, right? At what point would we modify ourselves to the extent that perhaps that creature no longer is entitled to ensoulment? It's no longer human in the way that God made it. So these are very concerning, very scary ideas. To the Darwinian evolutionists out there that are also very concerned about this, though, what they're saying is, look, we don't got to worry about the wrath of God. We're talking about altering the balance of nature in ways that could set into motion things that cannot be reconciled. We can't get the genie that you started out talking about back in the bottle.
Exactly. And by the way, we're talking here on the basis of the material that you're going to be able to see in this 3-hour DVD set. 2 DVDs just packed with information. The title, Inhuman. Subtitle, The Next and Final Phase of Man is Here. And I think that subtitle says it all, the final phase of man. The producer, editor of Inhuman is with us, Joe Artis. Joe, you not only worked to bring this thing to life, but you accompanied Tom in a lot of the interviews with a lot of the personalities that appear. And let's talk about some of the people that you talked to. Some of them very, very brilliant people, well connected in academic circles that appear in the documentary entitled Inhuman.
Well, as many, thank you first off, Gary, for having me on the program.
Sure.
As many of the people that will watch this film might assume about some of the personalities, if they come from a Christian worldview, for example, some of the personalities that sit opposite of that worldview in support of the idea that we're now going to genetically modify ourselves to become a superior human being. In fact, one of my favorite interviews was the one that we did with you a couple of years ago. And by the way, Tom, Gary, in terms of his understanding of the biblical timeline and how it relates to prophecy, the stuff that he said in the interview that we covered 2 years ago almost fits the timeline today as if he did the interview yesterday.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. In fact, I would just go so far as to say that people that watch Prophecy Watchers, that love Gary Stearman, you are going to want to get a copy of this documentary, because Gary really is the standout scholar in the film. I can say things about him that he will never say
That's
about
right.
himself, but he really is. And the way he put this together was so insightful, foresightful, because what you allowed us to do 24 months ago is today's headlines, and you actually saw it coming and talked about it. But you also, of course, put it into a biblical context, into a scholarly context, and even into a prophetic context. And you wound up being the standout individual in terms of this film, Inhuman, which we went across the nation. We've got the world's authorities from the transhumanist camps, from the U.S. President's Council on Bioethics. Hugo de Garis, one of the most famous transhumanists in the world, that says we are going to go down this road and it's going to lead to gigadeath. I mean, he basically describes Armageddon,
Right.
and yet he's one of the guys helping design the brains that he believes is going to lead to all of our
And of course,
death.
along the journey, some of the folks that sit opposite the Christian worldview, the ones that are in favor of some of this, we assumed, and I assumed, that when we met them, could they be hostile? Mm-hmm. And of course, this follows the fact that, for those that saw the first program that I think you've aired last week, they know that Tom came under some pretty heavy attack by the transhumanists who opposed some of his questions, lobbing, social media grenades at him. One gentleman called him, compared him to the Unabomber, and said that, Tom Horn is crazy and all this. But we were able to get sit-downs with Dr. James Hughes, Natasha Vita-Moore. The New York Times called her the first.
She is actually considered to be the world's first and greatest female transhumanist philosopher.
Now, she is very impressive in this DVD because you actually have a wonderful, wide-open conversation with her. And she's not at all reticent to say what she believes, and you really catch her vision.
Right.
For example, a very graphic vision was that she dreamed of a time when one might be able to control one's skin tone or skin color for cosmetic purposes.
Being able to see through the skin to see the nanobots at work, repairing various cells and things like this.
Yeah.
But my point
In other
was
words,
going
she
to be...
thinks
Well,
this is
and keep in mind, she's a PhD that teaches at the university level, so she's a very educated woman. She's very up on the sciences and what she imagines could be happening anywhere from 10 years to 100 years from now.
Yeah. And so you actually had an opportunity to meet with
Very
these people.
nice woman, too. Very cordial, warm, welcomed us into their home. Just wonderful person.
But to that end, and this was all I was going to say, sorry, Tom, just very nice people. And that was what I was going to say, is that we went into some of their homes, and I expected, could they be hostile? And they were very warm. They really surprised me. They were all very professional. Natasha took me aside and showed me some tricks that she had been teaching her dog. Max Moore, who is heavily regarded as the father of all of transhumanism, offered us coffee. So it was not what I expected.
So, and when you say transhuman, let's define that for people who may not be familiar with the term. What does transhumanist mean?
Basically, in a nutshell, transhumanists are people that believe we are going to use powerful new emerging fields of technology. So we call them GRINS, G-R-I-N-S, genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, synthetic biology. So we're going to use GRINS technology to modify what it means to be a human, to perfect. We'll use it therapeutically to cure diseases. We're going to brain-machine interface ourselves with artificial intelligence systems so that we can learn at greater paces. We're going to change our genetic makeup, which is what this kind of technology is all about.
Yeah, and this kind of technology, folks, is what those scientists in Washington were meeting to discuss. And let's pull up this little refrigerated container. This is a common, everybody's familiar with the little ice boxes.
Right.
And what's in here requires refrigeration. And why, Tom?
Well, that is called a CRISPR-Cas9 kit. If people want to go to Google and just type in CRISPR, they'll see this in the news everywhere.
Right.
All the mainstream media outlets are talking about it, science laboratory scientists from around the world. Why? Well, this technology was actually created in 2012, and it's been quietly being perfected from that point until now. Now they're at a point where it's nearly 100% efficient in terms of its ability to be able to modify the genetic makeup of any creature that uses egg and ova, sperm, for procreating. So humans, animals, and you
Now-
can see this.
I'm going to show this to the camera right now. This is a box that has 4 little vials, 5 little vials in it, and something is in the vials.
Yeah.
And what would that
Well,
be?
something alive is in the vials, and so it is a CRISPR kit. It basically is encoded to be injected into the human system. This one's called a gene knockout kit. So the idea is, if you were going to do gene therapy, you would use this kit to, put it in layman's terms, to cut, allow you to go in and edit or introduce new information, paste back together the DNA strand, and you've just done very efficient, very powerful genetic therapy. A lot of really good, amazing things could come out of this technology. They are starting soon experiments on cures to cancer through gene therapy using CRISPR-Cas9 technology. So there's a lot of really positive things, miraculous things, things that the church might even get behind and support, right, that could be used for therapeutic purposes. But things that have great power, you see how little that is and how powerful that is, that why would all the major nations of the world right now be gathering their scientists to say somehow we have to put a universal moratorium on the use of this technology? How powerful could it possibly be? Well, there's another technology that's used in tandem with this. It's called gene drive. And what it literally means is you could drive into extinction, or you could drive into existence, a new form of a species that would eradicate and replace all previous species before
You
it.
could change a species, whether it wanted to be changed or not.
That's right.
Force it. Now, and you gave the example of fruit flies that I suppose you've read and or written about.
Yeah, that's actually, if you go to Google, just type in CRISPR and type in fruit fly, or type in gene drive and type in fruit fly, and you'll see one of the experiments that was recently done at the university level where they took a fruit fly, they changed the genes so that now it was either red or blue, I forget, instead of its traditional dark color. And they introduced it into a control environment, and immediately these dominant genes eradicated all previous forms of the fruit fly and introduced a new form of fruit fly that was a different color. And what that was a proof of concept that we can use this technology now to drive into existence and drive out of existence however we might want to change.
Does that frighten
the
you?
environment.
Does it frighten you like it frightens me?
It doesn't just frighten me, because here's what the scientists are saying. They're saying it could be used for great good. It could also be used for great evil. If ISIS, for instance, took mosquitoes and created a plague and created a strong gene drive inside these mosquitoes and then released some of them into the Florida Keys, it could be 6 months down the road where all these mosquitoes that are natural, malaria would be the least of our concerns. We could have a new kind of influenza that was genetically created, put it into a gene drive situation. The CDC suddenly is traveling the world because we've got tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people that are sick and dying. So that's the great concern about this technology.
Now, let me just say this again. The technology is called CRISPR, C-R-I-S-P-R. It's an acronym, clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats. And I love the word palindromic, because palindromic means it reads the same in both directions. In other words, something can be injected into a series and it'll plug in an uninterrupted fashion because it's the same on both ends, if you will. And it reads the same in both directions. And to me, this really is scary, because overnight you can literally change the genomic nature of an organism.
Of humans, do it at the germline level, it now becomes heritable. So again, the Gattaca utopian worldview is we could create a cure to cancer and future humans wouldn't even be susceptible to cancer. That's the upside. We could also create modern forms of Nephilim, non-humans, that then become a dominant gene-driven species that begin eradicating all previous forms of life. So that sounds astonishing. I mean, you hear me say something like that, and some people are going to go, "Oh, please."
Right.
Go to Google type in CRISPR, type in gene drive, look how scientists around the world are coming together now to say this is the game changer and it is no longer sci-fi. One other quick thing, this is not the only thing that the documentary Inhuman is about. I mean, we cover a lot of territory, including supernaturalism, prophecy, ethics about future designer children, those kind of things too.
Well, one of the things that I interjected in this series was the fact that God saw those genetic interlopers as the ultimate evil. And their progeny, he demanded to be wiped out. In fact, after the flood, there were giants. There were giants in the Holy Land. And Lord instructed Moses and his followers, wipe out those giants. I don't want them to exist anymore. The same technique that was used before the flood, God says after the flood, get rid of those giants. And he charged everybody from Moses and the 10 spies all the way down to David and Goliath to get rid of the giants. And furthermore, the Bible says the giants would not see resurrection. Once they were dead forever and would never live again. Unlike human beings who by faith or through faith are promised resurrection into glorified bodies. It's genetics in action, Tom. That's what it is.
Right, and you know, when they watch this film, especially when they listen to you talk in this film, but some of the other prophecy experts that are in there too, your eyes start to open to the reality that the Bible is really all about genetic purity.
Yes.
It begins with it. It's the promise of the coming seed that's going to bruise thy seed. And by the way, doesn't that open an interesting idea?
Yeah.
That Satan has seed? I often wonder, you know, when Daniel's talking about they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men.
Right.
Well, what is it in the end times that's happening? Something that's non-seed is mingling itself with seed, but it's always about seed, right? Seed, purity, the lineage, the whole book of Matthew, all the time that's spent committed to providing essentially the paper trail, the bloodline to the birth of the
and
Messiah.
wherever you read about seed in the Bible, just you can pencil in the word genetics. It's all about genetics or the genome. Back to you for a moment, Joe. Let's go back and talk about some of the people who are pro genetic research. How did they impress you? What did they seem like idealists, or did they really seem driven to do what they were doing?
Absolutely. I found all of them to be extremely passionate, and I think that the transhumanists truly believe that first of all, I think they're way ahead of the Christian community in this discussion. But secondly, I also believe that they truly believe in their heart that what they are doing, the science, that this is really going to lead to a utopia, a much better life for all of us. We're not going to be sick. Natasha Vitamore, for example, feels like if people need less in the future, there will be enough for everyone because their bodies won't require medicine. We won't need to eat as much, for example. If we could tweak our genetic makeup to require less protein to survive through the day, there would be less people, there wouldn't be so much greed. You know what I mean? People competing for the limited resources that are available. It's just going to be this wonderful, wonderful utopian paradise. I think they really, really sincerely believe that. But let me give you a perfect example of about how genetic intervention can oftentimes not be put back in the bottle once the genie is out, like you open the program with. I have a dear friend who is a high-level German Shepherd breeder, okay? She's been breeding these world champion German Shepherds for years and years and years. She was disclosing to me not even a week ago some of the grave concerns now that science has for a lot of these animal breeds. How they're being inbred based on things like color. Superficial things like, oh, I'd like a larger dog, okay? But the skeletal systems don't support the infrastructure. Superficial things, what we think are pleasing to the eye but have nothing to do with natural procreation and so forth. She paid an incredible amount of money, getting into trouble now with some of the breeds that they're seeing today with hip dysplasia, kidneys and liver and so forth shutting down much, much earlier in life. Lifespans are shorter than they used to be. And some of the folks that were doing these genetic selective breeding programs in the 80s, all the way back in the 70s and 80s, saw a day coming where these breeds could be in big trouble. I would challenge your viewers to go on Google, do a basic search, breeds that are in big trouble, the Golden Retriever, the Chihuahua, the German Shepherd. Science does not have a response now for what it is that's happening to these dogs over time and how to fix it. They bring in a 20-year-old sample from a male German Shepherd from the 1980s in an effort to purify and bring back the pure genetics before this intervention began to take place. And they found that because they're using a modernized host, female dog, that the offspring carried the same disabilities, the same shortened lifespans, the same hip dysplasia, the same diseases and illnesses that are happening now.
And your example,
and they can't go back now. So they're using samples
is a great example of what could happen to humankind. In other words, it's already happening in the animal world, where this kind of interbreeding and genetic manipulation has been going on for some time now. And why not? Because they're lesser forms of life. You know, we can tamper with them, and we can create what we want to. And by the way, Joe has created this book, Dead Pets Don't Lie, which is all about not only the entire animal husbandry world, but it's also about what you feed those animals, and that has been genetically modified as well. So there are two sides to this story.
Yeah, I mean, we actually released the book as a companion to the movie, because we're really talking about genetic Armageddon. We're talking about everything from the foods that we eat to the animals that we care for and that we have a responsibility for in terms of our dominion over the animal kingdom that was given to us from God. And now we're talking about humans. So we're literally talking about an all-out assault on all of creation.
Wow.
A genetic assault, a genetic Armageddon. And Gary, there's one other part. We want to really try to say this before the program is done today, and that is there is also a supernatural aspect to this. Among what we found among the transhumanist camp is there is a spiritual thirst. They just don't want to get their answers from God. They want transcendence, right? They want to live forever and have eternal life, but they don't want to have to get it through Jesus Christ, have to get it through God. That's in the documentary as well. But then there's also those who believe that by modifying our genetic makeup, we could open doors of perception. You mentioned earlier how some animals can see into the infrared spectrum. Well, Nick Bostrom, who's one of the most world-famous transhumanists, just gave testimony before the United Nations. He's written extensively on how perhaps through combining our genetic makeup with animals or certain kinds of animal genes using this CRISPR-Cas9 type technology to introduce that genetic information into our DNA strands, we might be able to open a mode of perception, be able to see into other realms.
Oh, wouldn't you like to be able to smell better and to see better like the animals do, and maybe to have better hearing?
Yeah, but what if we do something else? Because remember Balaam's donkey? The donkey could see into the supernatural world. So one has to wonder if some of the motivation behind much of these experiments, DARPA's budgets and whatever, isn't an experiment to try to somehow make contact. Remember, Arizona State University launched the SOFIA project for that very purpose, to use transhumanism and science to open a gateway.
Wow.
So what kind of technology could we be talking about that could cause what? Some ability to be able to regain the brain's tech that God shut off at the fall, or what are we talking about?
We used the expression the genie's out of the bottle at the beginning of this program, but there's another expression that's famous, Pandora's box. Once you open the box, look out. Things may come out that you didn't expect to come out. We're tampering with the relationship between God-created beings, ourselves, and the spirit world. And the spirit world would like nothing better than to corrupt our human genome. The whole Bible, in a way, is that story. If you want to see in absolute, complete, and all-encompassing terms what we've been talking about for the past few minutes, I would suggest Inhuman. This is 3 hours of the most interesting documentary you're going to see in a long time. Every Christian home should be able to have this, to see it for themselves and to show it to other people. And then you're going to know how to pray, because there's a lot to pray about these days. Corruption is on its way. Inhuman is the name of the DVD set, two DVDs, 3 hours, but we're accompanying it with a package. And this is called the Pandemonium package. Pandemonium's Engine by Tom Horn, Dead Pets Don't Lie by Joe Artis, Zenith 2016 by Tom Horn, and Forbidden Gates. Boy, you talk about a timely title, Forbidden Gates. I think we're opening some Forbidden Gates. This is the Pandemonium package. These 4 books, $69.95, and if you get them, you get the DVD set absolutely free. And that's called the Pandemonium package. Just check on the online bookstore, prophecywatchers.com, and you can find out how to order. And Tom, you're holding a copy of the September magazine.
Your September magazine actually has the same artwork from the movie.
And it has an article in it, by the way, by Tom Horn. And it's all about, guess what? It's all about the danger of genetic research that's ongoing. You need to apprise yourself of the facts, folks. Things are changing fast. Speaking of fast, we don't have too many more seconds. Tom Horn, Joe Artis, it's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thanks.
A pleasure, but also it sounds a warning for all of us. These are the last days. And I'd like to go out today reading something that Paul wrote to Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1. This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. We're there. Perilous comes from a Greek word that means ragingly insane, totally out of control. And human characteristics are listed in this warning, about 20 of them. And we see those in society today. But at the end of that list, we also see this in verse 8. Now, as Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, so do these also resist the truth. Men of corrupt minds reprobate concerning the faith. Jannes and Jambres were priests of Pharaoh, able through dark sorcery to change physical reality. They turned their rods into serpents in a contest, you remember, between Moses and the priests of Pharaoh, a contest basically on who controls the material universe. The priests of Pharaoh were able to counterfeit God's power for a limited time. I think that's what we're talking about today. We have a modern priesthood seeking to change physical reality, tampering in areas where they shouldn't be looking. And I want to thank Tom and Joe for being here today to warn us about things that are happening right now. We're watching, so you keep watching too. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.